Good day, lords and ladies, and welcome back to Songbringer. Now, I am doing this is going to be a post-commentary conclusion to my thoughts on this game. I decided to do a post-commentary conclusion because I found it was easier to focus on the factors of the game without trying to also manage the gameplay. First off, I just want to say that I do like this game. I think it is a good game. If you enjoy like the classic Zelda titles, like the Ocarina of Time, and although that kind of the Game Boy era of Zelda games, this is a very, very good game. Don't get me wrong, there are issues with it, I'm not going to lie. There are some things about it I dislike, and we're going to discuss those, but the game is a good game, and if you do like that kind of Zelda era complexity, it is very nice, but as I said, there are some things that I do find frustrating. The first one I will mention is that I don't know, it's the general lack of narrative. It has a story, as you're seeing here, the story is playing out, but at the same time, because it's done in a procedurally generated world, there's no easy way of finding a story. You stumble across it, which can be very frustrating. Also, another thing that the game does not particularly manage well is item location. For example, cacti. Cacti are your only healing item in the game outside of general healing pickups that you get from breaking things or killing enemies, and they're A, not that effective, and B, it's one of these stupid things, which is that you find them by accident a lot of the time, or if you're fortunate to stumble across this place, and as you see, you take a cacti and it affects your view of the world, and you can see stuff that you haven't seen before. But it's one of these problems that I have, is that if they're going to do something like that, you should give you the healing item soon, rather than you going, oh, I stumbled across it randomly, because I could go all the way to the first boss battle, which I did, and continually get beaten up like I did, because I didn't have any healing items on me, and it's a bit frustrating. Also, as I had made comment to, the way the story works in this game is very piecemeal. It doesn't flow particularly well, the story. It's if you stumble across an area where the story basically happens, and you can find items in the world that if you have your little robot companion with you, he'll scan and there'll be dialogue, but there's no flowing narrative, as it were. There's no sort of items that have a background description like you get in, say, the Dark Souls series. I find the story in this quite I'm trying to think of the right term. Probably, it's very disassembled. It's very sort of in parts. It's dislocated. It's very. It doesn't flow for me. The problem is that the story, what there is of it that I have come across, it doesn't flow particularly well because of the random generation of the world. You stumble across it, and that's all fine and dandy, but it doesn't really help the story doing it like that, because you can go for ages without finding anything. It's like this, for example, the problem I have, you get a cup, it's handy for drinking. It's okay, is there any other description that you can use for it? Is there anything else that can help me understand how I'm supposed to use this item? It's nope, that's just it. That's all this is to it. And I find that a bit. Some items have very bland descriptions, the one that's coming up here, this one here. Droid scanner. If these droid scanners are area producing a digital map, which is basically you use it and that's what it does. But you can get items that have no description whatsoever, and there are ways of doing stuff in the game that they never describe to you. For example, combining items. I've had the bot said, the good little companion, you can combine this item with something else. How do we go about doing that? Is there a button I can press to combine the items together? Do I need to find something to combine the items together? I think from reading comments online, there's a place you can take the items to be combined, but they don't tell you it. I think the main issue that this game has is that there's no handbook or anything. There's no basic what to do like guide that's in the game. There's no tutorial. The button controls are very simple, even if they do seem to be wanting you to have a controller rather than a keyboard. You can play this with a keyboard fine, but it constantly flashes at the beginning of the game asking you where your controller is. But like I said, I think my main criticism of this game is that it would have done a lot better with having just a basic guide at the beginning of the game, like a what to, just a what to section with the basic descriptions of how some of the mechanics in the game worked. Like, I have, at this moment in time here right now, I have no idea how I'm supposed to get out of this area. There's no hint to tell you what you're supposed to do. There's no advice, and you have no real understanding of what you're supposed to do. And I just cut to this area here just now just to show you another major issue that I have with the game: enemy hitboxes. As you can see, it's a bit. It's strange for me because the enemy hitboxes seem to work really well or very poorly. For example, I can walk past the boss at his feet and not hit him, but if I walk behind him at any distance whatsoever, I take damage, which is a bit frustrating because obviously he's quite tall, so it shouldn't affect me. But if I walk past him about halfway up his body, as you can see in this particular episode from behind, I take damage, while I can walk straight below him and not take any damage at all. So it's very frustrating for me then, that kind of thing, when they haven't fixed their hitboxes on their enemies, especially when your sword in the game has quite a long wind-up time for its attacks. It looks like it goes really quickly, but it actually swings relatively slowly. And it's one of these frustrations that I have about the game, is that if you're going to have a game where combat is such a major element, you need to have your hitboxes sorted out. You can't have it where I can walk right past the bloke on the bottom and not take any damage, but if I walk halfway up him, if I walk past him at the top and I haven't put a huge area of avoidance in with him, I take damage like this, as you see there. It doesn't really make any sense, and it's really frustrating. The other issue I find with the combat in the game is that your sword, which is supposed to be like your main weapon in this game, the animation for it is particularly, I don't know, it seems to be particularly slow. It's, especially when you're drawing it from your back, it's very slow animation, and that can be a problem when the enemies in the games are moving particularly quickly. It's like, see here, you can see me, I just dodged past him and the bottom took no damage, but if I go halfway above him, I take loads of damage. So at the moment I'm desperately trying to avoid myself from taking damage because I have no healing items, because the game didn't see fit to drop healing items for me at anywhere else in the game, so I'm just picking them up off the floor. I didn't get any of the cacti. But as you can see, the boss's hitbox is very strange, and I don't know, it was the thing I found really frustrating with this particular boss battle, was there was no like clear logic to how you were supposed to fight him. It was that if you went, I figured out eventually, but it became very frustrating that if I walked below him, there was a lot less likelihood of me actually getting hit, while if I walked above him, I could easily get hit like that, yeah. And I found it just very, very annoying. I think they do really need to fix the hitbox in their boss battles. That's one of my main issues I have with the game, is the hitboxes. The hitboxes are frustrating, especially when it comes to boss battles. The other area that problem I have is that because the game is procedurally generated, it breaks up the story narrative, so you have to, it just doesn't flow well. It's like with this, use it to light small flames. So you have this, you find an item like this in the world, it's like, oh okay, what do I use this for? There's no explanation what you use this for, it just says you use it to light small flames. And so you're sort of sitting here trying to figure out what I can do with it. I'm not totally sure, so I run around for a bit, and I think this is like one of the main weaknesses of the game, is that because they lack like narrative to tell you what you're supposed to be doing. this is the problem I have, is that in Dark Souls, for example, which does the same thing, where it doesn't tell you what you're supposed to do, the game basically hints at it. In this, unless I mean, I suppose there are sort of clues probably scattered somewhere. I stumbled across what I was supposed to do purely by accident, by just trying to set everything on fire, because I basically suspected that that's what you had to do, because you had been given a lighter, and I thought, okay, if we can try and set something on fire, that's probably the way out. But if I hadn't guessed that, I would have probably eventually gone frustrated and quit, because obviously there's like no hint otherwise what you're supposed to do. As you can see, I'm basically just running around trying to get health back. I don't know, I mean, this game is one of those games that it's not a bad game, but there are things in it which I really do not enjoy. Like, I don't enjoy the boss battle combat. I find the combat mechanic in it a bit frustrating, because obviously the hitboxes are all over the place. I also found the disjointed nature of the world a bit annoying, because obviously it breaks the story narrative, and you just like stumble across it, and it's like no rhyme or reason kind of thing. But I eventually sort of figure out what I'm supposed to be doing, eventually by coming up to the area up here where the stone pillars are, and I think maybe I can set these on fire, which seems to work, which is useful. But at the same time, for someone who doesn't just set everything on fire, they're not going to get this easily, and it will become a frustration. I don't know. I just found the game to be very disjointed, and the disjointedness did not help it very much. In my honest opinion, I found that it actually took away from the game, where I know that the procedurally generated nature of the game is supposed to be like its main draw, but I found that it broke the narrative. So like, you stumble across a piece of the narrative, and it's like, okay, was I supposed to beat the first boss? Was I supposed to do the first boss battle first, or was I supposed to do this first? And because you have there's no like correct story path that you're supposed to take, you just stumble across this stuff willy-nilly. It makes the game a lot less focused, I find. That was the thing I liked about Zelda, which was with Zelda, the game, story-wise anyway, proceeded at a very clear pace. Like, you went and did this, then you did this, and then you did this, and that worked really well because it felt that you were driving the narrative forward. With this, I find that the procedural generation of the game takes away from it in a certain extent, where you can't really focus on the story and the characters, because you don't know what you can, like, skip bits of the story, like stumble around in the dark wildly until you find something. It's like this guy here. It's like, was I supposed to meet him after fighting the boss battle that I had problems with in the last video, or was I supposed to meet him before fighting the boss battle? Can I skip whole sections of the game because I basically beat the boss before I meet this guy? It's one of the things I have a problem with, is that if you're going to have a story narrative like this, it's better to have it in a world which is very, very set and designed in such a way that you cannot skip elements of it. But unfortunately, the developer has decided that the procedural generation of the world is going to be the main focus. It's the main gimmick of the game, is that you can put in a random seed every time and the world will be different. The story stays the same, but the layout of the world is always different. And that sounds really good, but from a story narrative point of view, it breaks the narrative. And I just don't particularly like it. I mean, if you're going to have random generation, make it so that the story is so open that it doesn't really affect it. But obviously it's like this here. Okay, I have no weapons. How am I supposed to get to this health upgrade? I can set the enemies on fire, but besides that, I mean, this is the problem that I have, which is that you put in set mechanics like, okay, you can fight stuff, and then you take away your player's ability to fight stuff, and then don't explain to them that they can use other things to defend themselves with, which is frustrating. If I had died there, I would have been quite frustrated, because okay, how am I supposed to fight these things? You haven't told me if I can or cannot fight these things. you could have just said, oh, I think I can set them on fire or something, very, very indirectly in the character, and it would have been fine, because then it's like, okay, cool, I can do this, I can set them on fire, I can maybe use my hat. But in a game where the whole premise is like you've got this sword that hums, and now you don't have the sword that hums, and you're trying to figure out what to do, it can be a bit, some people will find that annoying. And like, here you go, you get your sword back, it's fantastic, it's great, yay. But if you're going to do something like this, you want to have it in a world where the story is the main feature, rather than the feature being the main gimmick of the game, I find. And here we go, we have a cutscene. Like, this is the other issue that I have, is that you have like cutscenes, but you have to really interpret them, which, don't get me wrong, is fine, because it's good to have interpretations of stuff. And the guy said, oh, about the tower and like the evilness of the tower, but some people won't make the connection. For whatever reason, they won't make the connection, and it's like, oh, okay, I've got a bloke in a tank with 4 eyes waking up. What does that mean? Or there's this weird glowing tower. What does that mean? It's like, oh, I've got ominous tower in my mind. Your mind, like, you see him there. They talk about it, and the thing is that because the game doesn't take itself too seriously, it's like, okay, I have had like dreams of a really sinister tower. It's like, oh yeah, you're going nuts. It's like, okay, is it actually something, or is it just my imagination? I don't know. This is like the problem I have with the game, is that if you're going to put procedural generation into something, you either make the game very serious, because otherwise you basically lose the narrative of the game, or you make, I don't know, I just find the game's narrative very disjointed due to the fact that it's procedurally generated. The world's narrative seems to be very all over the place, and it is possible for you to miss story elements. I don't know, it's just, it's one of these things you can't really get your hand on. Unless you like, I don't know, I suppose it probably has the fact that I have a more fond memory of the original Zelda series, but I do remember the Zelda series, their story being a lot more fluid, not fluid, that's the wrong term I'm looking for. The story was more direct, was that it was a lot easier to stay connected with the main story than I find in this one. The story in this one is so piecemeal, because obviously the world is randomly generated and you just like stumble across it, that I found myself not really caring about the story at all. It's like with these broken motorcycles, your character never makes mention of them. He never comments about the broken motorcycles. He never makes any sort of qualm about them. They're just there. It's like, okay, what about, were they with other people? Like, were my friends with me? Like, why haven't you put a narrative for this in, explaining why the motorcycles are here? And they're obviously important. Also, as you can see here, what I meant about the enemies in the game move very fast, but your attack animation is quite slow, so I find that after a while the sword actually becomes more of a nuisance than anything. It's easier to kill things with like your hat, or it's like here, this item here. It's like, obviously it probably has some kind of story linkage or world linkage in some way, but you can't act on it because obviously for some reason your bot isn't picking it up, or you just haven't got to the point of the story where you need to come back here. And it's like, okay, that's fine, but you haven't set out the rules for how to do that kind of thing. There's like, okay, obviously I need to come back here at some later date. It's no, you have to try and figure out, oh, I should come back here at some later date on your own, which can be very annoying. You can see here what I mean about the slow combat mechanics, which is that it looks like you're going really fast, but if you look at how fast the actual enemies are bobbing about, it's really easy to get overwhelmed, especially with these set camera angles where you can't change them. So if an enemy's hiding behind terrain that you can't see, it's very hard to gauge your swings with your sword in comparison to the enemy's movements, which is quite a problem. Also, I find like the sarcastic tone of the game sometimes takes away takes away the seriousness. Like for here, which is that you have the scene here, and it's if I hadn't taken the cacti, I wouldn't have seen the crack in the wall there. And I only took it because my health was damaged, but there was no indication that I was supposed to take it. And the only comment that you had with the character was that, oh, I think I need to take a pee. That's the only thing he says, which is like, oh, that's very funny, very ha-ha. But in places where you're supposed to have other ways of getting about and all this other kind of stuff, having no clear indication of what you're supposed to do I find it sort of reduces the game in the way. There are other things I will have mentioned, like for example, the bombs in this game. Their blast radius is a lot farther than they initially show. So if you're not careful, you can stand here and take damage from your own weapons. Not always, but you can. I don't know. I just find it. I like the game. Don't get me wrong. I think the game is very, very good. And I've said this several times, but at the same time, there are features about it that I do not like. I don't like the darkness in the game, the fact that you have no easy way of light sources besides your little bot. I don't like how the hitboxes on the bosses seem to be all over the place, because that makes the game a lot less enjoyable as well. I don't like the procedural generation. I think it breaks the story narrative. So if you like a game where the story narrative is all over the place and you stumble across it willy-nilly, this is the game for you. If you like a game that has a more structured story narrative, even if it isn't a procedurally generated world, if you like it where the story narrative is a lot more fixed, then this is going to be one of these games that's going to probably make you very frustrated. Like here, for example, like I couldn't physically attack fast enough to take out everything that's here, because obviously the combat animations are too slow. So I don't know. It's like the game itself is good. I like the art style. I like the general like tone. The music in the game is nice, but at the same time there are issues with the game, and I can't enjoy it. Not as much as people think I should. Sorry about that. That's my timer going off. So yeah, overall I like the game, but it does have flaws. It definitely needs to have a what-to manual put into it. So I've been Cornish-Knight. If you have liked, please press the like button or subscribe, and I shall see you all next time. Goodbye.